Gonzalez expected to join us today as well?
No, I believe you just have me today.
Oh, there's no.
That's all we need.
You.
That's all we need.
All right. Well, we have all commissioners, so welcome back to the Washington County Board of Commissioners work session for Tuesday, December 8th. Our next item on the agenda is a Metro Regional Government end of year update. I'd like to welcome my former colleague, Metro Councilor Craig Dirksen, who I know, like Commissioner Schouten, is nearing the end of his time and a long tenure as an elected official here in our Washington County community. So welcome, Councilor Dirksen, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Chair Harrington. Yes, I have 28 days left, but who's counting? So I appreciate the opportunity to come and meet with you today. It's good to see you again. I just saw Commissioner Rogers and Pam last night. It was great to see them at the Region 1 ACT meeting. So let's jump right into it. If you go to the next slide, please. 2020 has certainly been a year of unpredictability. We've faced so many obstacles, from a global pandemic to wildfires to political uncertainty and civil unrest. Now, we've all been challenged in our roles as public servants and also as individuals. But for the most part, we've all adapted and risen to the challenge to still do our jobs, even in the face of all these limits and restrictions. So I'm so grateful to everyone who has stepped up during these trying times, including every jurisdiction in Washington County. And I'm proud of the county for the steps they've taken, providing grant funds for small businesses, for childcare providers, and for creating downloadable toolkits to help businesses prevent and address COVID-19 outbreaks. And across the whole region, local businesses ran PPE and food drives for first responders. Communities opened up sanctuary to those who were displaced by those wildfires, and we've stood in solidarity with our BIPOC communities. Through all this, Metro's mission still stands strong, and we've continued to plan for the future of our growing region, working with our city, county, and community partners to invest in ways to alleviate the strain on our housing, our transportation, and land use needs, while seeking regional solutions to supportive housing service. Next slide, please. 5 times over the last 2 decades, voters have continued to support investments that protect water, natural areas, wildlife habitat, and expanding our access to nature. Our staff continues to refine the $475 million Parks and Nature Bond renewal that was passed by voters in 2019, which is centered on racial equity, community engagement, and climate resilience. Now, we've just wrapped up recruiting for community members to be on the new Bond Oversight Committee, and we look forward to formally appointing members soon. In the short term, Metro Council is working to target bond investments that benefit communities that are most impacted by this pandemic, while expediting the capital grants program and the participatory grant-making pilot program. For the local share, staff is currently working on a handbook for our 27 different local park providers to help guide the work of identifying priority parks and nature projects in their communities. We'll be reviewing the draft handbook with our partners pretty soon so that park providers can begin identifying and submitting priority projects for those local share dollars. Next slide. I don't need to tell you that this region has been facing an affordable housing crisis for years, but 2020 has really highlighted the importance of making investments in housing. A heartfelt thank you to voters of this region who in 2018 passed our affordable housing bond and also the 2020 supportive housing services measure. In total, there are 17 affordable housing projects currently underway in the region with funds committed from the 2018 Affordable Housing Bond. And in fact, our partners are moving so fast on these projects that the figures in your packet may already be outdated, but they're up to date in my slides today. As I prepare to retire from elected office, it's a great pleasure to be able to say that my district, District 3, currently holds the region's lead with the most projects under the 2018 Affordable Housing Bond. 7 total projects in various stages of development. A major thanks to the community partners and all the government agencies that have helped make this possible. But we also need to celebrate the living wage jobs that come with construction of these affordable homes. Many of the projects in Washington County also exceed the county goals for women and minority-owned business contracting. Next slide. Together, these projects will create 1,897 new affordable homes, which is about half the total unit production for the entire program. And we're actually ahead of the curve at this point to achieve that goal. And I was happy to see Chair Harrington at the virtual groundbreaking for the viewfinder in Tigard, which will provide much needed larger units for families and will also set aside units for veterans. And I'm also excited about the South Cooper Mountain project, which will provide 75 units for individuals and families near the new Mountainside High School and lots of other great amenities. Next slide. Work is also underway to implement the supportive housing services measure that regional voters approved in May of this year. And the Metro Council has appointed the oversight committee members just last month. Program implementation is on track and expected to begin in the summer of 2021, bringing critical resources to the region, especially Washington County, to address the urgent needs of those experiencing homelessness. Washington County staff is working to engage the community to develop their local implementation plan. Supportive housing services include 3 key elements: long-term rent assistance to help those at risk of homelessness, wraparound services, and actual housing units. We need 5,000 more units to support the people of this region. A few weeks ago, Metro led a workshop with agency and community partners to focus on strategies for generating those units. And we look forward to continuing to work with partners on this goal and to earning the support of even private landlords and affordable housing developers to help get us there. Next slide. Metro continues to make progress on the regional waste plan as a blueprint for achieving the community vision that addresses challenges with our garbage and our recycling system. This includes continuing to advocate at the state for more producer responsibility, including household hazardous waste, plastics packaging, and paper, and mattresses. Fun fact, did you know that 85% of your mattress, your old mattress, is recyclable if done properly? Metro is also continuing our engagement work on a possible new state-of-the-art center for collecting waste and recycling here on the west side in Cornelius. And there's a survey currently available on our website for residents to weigh in on that idea. Next slide. Well, I'm extremely disappointed that the Get Moving 2020 measure did not pass this year, but I want to thank our region's voters for at least considering the measure. And Metro is still committed to our vision of improving the region's transportation system to benefit everyone, including communities of color, low-income residents, and businesses. And while the outcome of this election might give us the opportunity to tailor our approach to better meet community needs, we continue to need a complete transportation system that is safe and reliable for everyone, regardless of their choice of mode. Though I'll be leaving office in a couple of weeks, 28 days, I'll still be around, and I look forward to making sure the community continues to come together on this issue. Next slide. Despite this year's challenges, we've accomplished a lot in 2020, thanks to the tremendous work both of Metro staff and our community and jurisdictional partners like Washington County. I'm encouraged by the progress we've managed to make in advancing our regional goals, and I look forward to the possibility for years to come. It's been a pleasure working with all of you and for serving District 3 for the past 8 years. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Commissioners.
Craig, thanks for all your service, Craig. It's been really a pleasure working with you. It's been great, and you've played a major role in making Metro a well-respected significant player on the regional scene.
Well, thank you. You can't ask for more than that. I appreciate that.
I would add, Craig, you're one of the favorite sons of this District 3 as well. Being a former mayor in Tigard, and then now at Metro, you and I have known each other a long time. Long time. And as I've mentioned to you last night, no one brings more passion and commitment to the job than you do. And in the transportation area, you were the chair of PAC at one point, and I never ceased to be amazed about how well you conducted yourself and how much work you did to understand the issues. You and I have had many conversations about ODOT issues as well as transportation issues, and I deeply respect the time you've put in. So I know your wife is retired now, and now you're not really retiring, but you're kind of slowing down a little bit on at least this side. And I know we'll see each other around town, but I really regret having you leave. You're example of what this is all about in public service. You're a great asset to the community.
Well, thank you. I have to say that I have mixed feelings about it. Obviously, I've been an elected official now for 20 years, and it was not a role that I ever sought early on. I just kind of fell into it. I am kind of looking forward to having the flexibility in my schedule and freedom to be able to do some other things. But it's going to be challenging not being on the front lines of trying to, work to make our region a better place too. So we'll see how it goes.
I'd like to say thank you for your presentation, Craig, and thank you for your friendship. You've helped me a lot as I've grown in my roles, and I appreciate all of that, all of the help that you've provided, the perspective. I also want you to know I appreciate you always have a positive attitude. You're always looking at what the next, if we don't get there, what the next step could be. So I thank you for that as well. And for those of you that may not know, Craig is also a Royal Rosarian. He's done more for the entire community here than many might know. And so spreading the goodwill is something that comes naturally to you, and I appreciate it. So my best wishes to you, Craig.
Well, thank you, Pam. I appreciate that. I've appreciated our friendship as well, and I know you'll continue to go forward and do well.
Commissioner Willie?
Oh.
Well, I don't know what I could say to add to all of those accolades. I certainly agree with all of them. Craig, I've known you for not nearly as long as Roy has and the rest of the group, but we've been around. I probably met you mostly when I became mayor in 2009, and it's been really a joy. I especially enjoyed having conversations and working with you as a mayor when you were on the Metro Council, and I always felt like you listened and tried to find solutions to all of those things. So thanks for your service. Appreciate it. And I have a printer going on behind me, so sorry.
Oh, can't even hear it. Well, thanks, Jerry. It's been great working with you as well. It's been great working with all of you. And I know, Dick, you're retiring as well. And so we get to put our feet up a little, and we'll be able to sit back and just criticize the actions of others.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. By the way, the county has partnered up with Metro as some key points. One of them is that we're very proud of the fact that we put in some of the first money that led to the capital campaign for what became the Craig Dirksen Nature Park in Tigard.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Councillor Dirksen. I would add that it has been a real pleasure to get to know you while you were the mayor of Tigard, and then getting to work with you as a colleague on the Metro Council, and now in my role as county chair. You've been a dedicated public servant, striving for the betterment of all of our communities, and I appreciate your commitment to that. I do have a question for you. As we welcome a new counselor to Metro District 3, what are your thoughts on how we should interact and get to know a new member of the Metro Council whose district includes a big portion of Washington County as well? Because your district included a little bit, or District 3 continues to include a little bit of Clackamas County as well.
Yeah, the Wilsonville, of course, and then the piece of Tualatin that's also in Clackamas County. I don't know, I'm sure, yeah. Mr. Rosenthal, he's been involved, he's not been an elected official, but he's been involved in the region for a long time. And I would suspect that most, if not all of you, have had some contact with him already. Having the Metro Councilor come and give updates on a regular basis like this is a good way as well. I've always also encouraged that, of course, in Washington County, has the CPO program, and also meeting with the CPOs is a very important thing for elected officials to do. But I'm sure you'll run into him on boards and committees around, and he has his own, as I've really focused a lot on transportation. Mr. Rosenthal also has his own areas of focus, and I'm sure that he'll be wishing to engage with you, particularly in those areas as well. So I wish all of you well.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Dirksen. Really appreciate all of your service. Have a good time with that not so young puppy anymore.
Yeah.
And I hope that you and Commissioner Scouten will both be the recipients of early vaccines, so that you can show us what it's like to get back to traveling and being out and about, versus all of us being sequestered at home during these days. So thank you again.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us
yeah,
here today.
I won't be doing any more traveling for a while.
Be safe on that motorcycle, Craig.
Actually, I don't know if you know this, I got rid of my motorcycle last year.
That's right. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I traded it for something fun with 4 wheels instead of 2.
Great, great. Well, thank you again, and thank you for the update. It's good to know where things are at as we close out this incredibly unique year. So
one can only hope that it's unique and remains unique.
great.
Thank
Thank you
all.
again. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Craig.
Next, we'll move on to our next work session topic, the draft habitat assessment guidelines for significant natural resources. I see that we have Corinne. Corinne, I don't know how to pronounce your last name properly.
It's not an easy one. It's Arindes.
Arendes, thank you very much. Oh, and there's Stephen Roberts. Oh, and I see Teresa Cherniak's name showing up. Andy Back is here now, and Michelle Miller. Do we have the full complement?
We do, Chair. I would also note that we have Jacqueline Saito from County Council is on. She's also been working very closely with us on all of the significant natural resource work. So I think with that, I won't say any more. I'll just turn it over to Teresa and Corinne to walk us through the presentation.
Teresa, did you want to start?
No, go ahead, Corinne.
Okay, So I am Karina Rendes, Associate Planner here at the County and Community Planning. And as noted by the chair, my colleague Michelle Miller, who brought forth the significant natural resources land use ordinance that's related to today's topic, is on hand as well. And I'm here to provide a briefing to your board on the habitat assessment guidelines. It is an informational briefing ahead of your board's consideration of adopting guidelines next week. And I'll start with some background information on why we're developing these, and I will these habitat assessment guidelines, staff has been informally referring to them as the guidelines, and I will probably do that throughout this presentation. And we want to tell you a bit about what's in these guidelines, as well as spend some time sharing with you what we've heard from the public about a draft version of the guidelines that was published at the end of November, and how we've provided some recommendations about how to revise the draft in response to those comments. Next slide, please. So for background, as you folks probably remember, in December 15th is when A engrossed ordinance number 869 becomes effective, and that is the ordinance related to the SNR, significant natural resources. As was mentioned this morning, the Land Conservation and Development Commission enforcement order will be terminated on that date. And this means that property owners will then be able to submit land use applications under the new regulations in the CDC. And so those new regulations do have some changes. They require applicants to field verify resource boundaries and complete a habitat assessment. So the habitat assessment guidelines provide applicants with technical instructions on how to meet these submittal requirements in the Community Development Code, section 422 on significant natural resources. Next slide, please. So how do these guidelines fit into the regulatory framework that the county operates under? Well, they are technical and they are procedural, so they don't create any new policy or regulations. The guidelines are limited to simply providing instructions to applicants on how they can meet those submittal standards in section 422-3. They are intended to be clear and objective instructions, but they also anticipate that there's going to be a certain level of technical skill and expertise needed in order to complete the tasks. Again, the guidelines are pretty limited in scope. They don't provide guidance on all of the requirements in section 422. Next slide, please. The guidelines are structured by task and provide instructions on how to field verify the upland wildlife habitat boundary, how to identify by size, type, and extent of the habitat on site, and then evaluate some of that habitat on site. And then the third step is to rate the different habitat values of the habitat that is found on the development site. So the content in these guidelines was developed by staff, but it was based on input from the county's environmental consultant, as well as consultation with staff at partner agencies, in this case, wildlife biologists working for Clean Water Services and the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. Next slide. So what do we mean when we say field verification? So this slide is intended to give you an idea of what we're talking about. And so the field verification is going to be based on the presence of tree canopy. And this boundary is going to be determined by professionals working on the development site. And this method was identified based on the methods of the original inventory and the opportunity to use objective measurements. As you may recall, the original inventory for wildlife habitat was highly reliant on the presence of tree canopy to identify significant areas. So this step mirrors that process. And then the instructions require applicants to determine this boundary based on tree size and then the density of tree growth, which are two objective measurements. And on this site, most of it is covered with trees. However, there are a couple of areas that are excluded from the boundary, and that kind of bigger spot in the more central area is where there's a house, and then the offshoot is the driveway. So that's a developed area outside of the resource. And then the smaller patch in the bottom left corner is where there's a garden. So it's the landscape there has just been completely converted. And so those two areas are outside of the resource boundary. Next slide, please. Oh, have I? Oh, great. So now that the applicant knows where the resource boundary is, they're going to take a look at what's there within the boundary and evaluate and rate that habitat. So for this step, the applicants will actually be on site identifying plant communities, and each community, for each community, there will be a sample point established in which all the plant species are recorded and additional attributes that contribute to habitat value are noted. This information is then used to determine whether a plant community is in good, marginal, or degraded condition. And then the location of the sample plots and the habitat conditions are then shown on a site map, which would be submitted by the applicant. So in this example, we can see that there is mostly good habitat on the site. There is an area of marginal, and then kind of up by the road and the driveway, the habitat's a little more degraded. And in this example, we've got 2 sample plots in the good area, and that's likely because of the size of that area. If there is a plant community that's greater than 1 acre, each acre of the plant community requires a sample plot. So this site kind of shows what then the applicant puts together in the habitat assessment and includes in their application. Next slide. Oh, so we did receive a lot of public comments, and actually maybe could we go back to the previous slide and just take a moment to pause and see if anybody has any questions or comments on the content of what would be in the guidelines and what the applicants would end up submitting.
I don't have any. I don't see any question mic changes from commissioners for questions. So I think you're good to go, Ms. Arendes.
Thank you, Chair. So next slide is the start of discussing public comments. And we received a total of 11 letters of comment on the draft guidelines. They were published November 25th, and then the Planning Commission also did take oral comments on the draft guidelines. Multiple comments relate to the time frame and the process for the habitat assessment guidelines review. When it comes to the timeline, the adoption is based on the effective date of the ordinance, and the county's interest in having these technical guidelines in place ahead of folks starting to submit applications to the department. So without the guidelines, neither staff nor applicants would have guidance on how to do certain habitat assessment tasks. And at this point, the review process has allowed for multiple parties to share comments, and staff has been able to, be responsive to those comments. Further, this kind of process of adopting through a resolution order is consistent with the existing department practice for adopting technical documents. And although we've gotten some questions on the process, those have been forwarded to County Council. And so if there's any questions about that aspect, I'll be deferring to them in that regard. Next slide. So in regards to comments that staff did use to inform their recommended changes to the guidelines. So there are a number of areas in which we have recommended changes, and we do think that will make for a better document. And these changes include updates to some linked citations, as well as the addition of a couple of other reference sources in the appendix section. We've also added a requirement that the habitat assessment be completed by a qualified professional, and specified that aerial photos show full tree canopy rather than bare leaves, and a requirement for photos of the sample plots on the development site. Staff also revised the evaluation and rating tasks to address connectivity to preserved upland wildlife habitat and acknowledge the importance a single tree can make to a plant community when it's one of the more unique native species. Next slide. There are two additional topics that we did receive multiple comments on, and that's wildlife observation and the protection of certain habitat. So in regard to the fact the guidelines don't address the presence of wildlife, plant communities are fixed while wildlife is not. The information on the plant communities can be collected at any time during a single site visit and is considered sufficient to address habitat quality. Whereas the wildlife surveys take more time to complete and are not always conclusive, as there may be many different reasons why wildlife is not present at any given time. And then regarding the community desire to use the guidelines to protect higher quality habitat, are considered the inclusion of different types of habitat. Under the broader requirements of Section 422, we do want to note that preserved habitat must be maintained in good condition. However, requiring an applicant to make the determination of what should be preserved based on the quality of the habitat on site would be a policy change that is really beyond the intent of the guidelines document. And these kinds of policy changes, including considering new or different resources as significant, really should be handled through the Goal 5 decision-making process. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that the Planning Commission has been involved in this decision-making process. They did have a work session briefing on November 18th, and then at their December 2nd meeting, the Planning Commission was able to deliberate on the draft guidelines, and they also took public comment. The Planning Commission strongly supported the addition of professional credentials for those performing the habitat assessment, with a real emphasis on the need to allow experienced professionals, regardless of their educational attainment, to qualify for that. Additional discussion focused on the timeline for the adoption of the guidelines and how to balance the important role of community input with the desire to have the methodologies in place by the time we expect land use applications will start to be submitted. Ultimately, the Planning Commission did vote to recommend your board adopt the guidelines after incorporating some additional revisions to the credentials requirements, and then a variety of other technical changes that we discussed with them during that meeting. Next slide. So today, staff is recommending that your board consider whether the technical guidelines provide adequate information for applicants to be able to meet the new submittal requirements in section 422-3 and provide guidance to staff on revisions, those that we just kind of talked about in this presentation, or other ideas that you may also have interest in. And then we do recommend that you consider adoption of the guidelines on December 15th as scheduled. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions your board may have.
I have a question about the 2 abstentions on the planning commission. What was the basis or the reasons for that?
Sure. So both commissioners who abstained, as well as the one who voted no, mentioned their concern about there not being enough community input, and that they would have preferred a timeline that allowed for greater community input over time.
Okay.
Any other questions, Commissioner Scouten? No. Any other? Go ahead, Commissioner Rogers.
Comment and a question. Comment is that this is very complex work. Thanks for it. This isn't easy stuff, and I know it'll probably be appealed, but it's good work. I also want to say that this really isn't a question, more of a comment. I agree to the credentialization issue. It's so hard to argue technical points if people don't have the same training or background. So I understand why the planning commission would want to do that. And so I'm supportive of that particular provision. So that's my only comments.
Other questions or comments at this point? No. Okay. No. All righty. I have a couple of questions. So we heard through the slides, you enumerated changes from community members, change requests, and from planning commissioners. The draft document that was provided to us for this work session, did that incorporate changes to the draft or not?
So
that's not clear.
Yeah, great question. So to clarify, the draft from November 25th is also what is part of this work session agenda packet. And so the recommendations that we're proposing in discussion with you today will be part of the next agenda packet for December 15th. And so that draft would then have all of staff's recommended revisions. And I believe that it will be published very soon.
Okay, so at this juncture, should I assume, well, maybe if you cruised back a few slides, should I assume that you're making, should I assume that you're making these improvements based upon these substantive comments?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
So
great.
Yeah, and I would just reiterate Kareen's point. The agenda packet for next week will post online later today, and we have provided the updated guidelines just here in the last 20 minutes over to the County Administrative Office to include in that packet.
Okay. All righty. So related to that, the one on requiring the aerial photos to show the full tree canopy, and the document talks a little bit more about the tree canopy, but I want to make sure, based upon the time of year, deciduous trees are leafed out or they're not leafed out. And I just wanted to double check that these habitat assessments can be done all throughout the year versus only during leaf out season, right?
good question. And yes, it is true that a working professional in this field is able to do an estimate a full leaf out condition. And the guidelines do point to doing that when you do the actual delineation of the boundary.
Okay. Then another question I have is with regard to practitioner feedback during the course of this pretty short public comment period on the draft habitat guidelines. Did you receive any comments of any kind from real practitioners, folks who do this kind of field work?
Sure. So we actually reached out to a couple of practitioners from the field, in particular, some of the individuals who reference their work in their comment letters as being experts. As then we also checked in with our own consultant, and then we sent that out to the agency to see if they wanted to respond. And we did get a variety of responses. I want to say we got 4 or 5 emails back, and the majority did support, including, opportunity to use education and work experience, as well as making sure those with only work experience were able to continue to still do the work.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification so that I'm clear on that. And then my last question was, you mentioned reviewing the feedback with a provision for county council. So I know we have the opportunity to hear from county council again next week before we adopt this, but I wanted to take a brief time out to see if the attorney that works most closely with you folks, Ms. Saito, has any comments that she feels are appropriate for us to be informed by right now.
Thank you, Chair Harrington. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you,
Wonderful.
Jackie.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, Chair Harrington and Board of Commissioners. My only comment is I just wanted to give you just a little bit of an idea of what the issue was related to process so that you have that in mind. The issue was Mr. Dobson, who represents Jill Warren, raised the issue that in his opinion, the adoption of the RNO does not follow the charter. So I will just leave it at that because the response to that is sort of legal advice. So if the board wants, I can perhaps set up an executive session or some way to communicate a response to that. But other than that, I have confidence that that the adoption of the RNO does not violate the charter.
We can also provide a memo on that too, if
Well, from my standpoint, I turn to you, our legal counsel, as to whether or not we're following proper procedure or not.
you'd just rather have that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think we had an internet hiccup there. I didn't mean to talk over you, Alan.
No, that's fine. I had some kind of, either my end or your end, there was a hiccup there, but I said we can provide a memo or an executive session or both.
Okay. Well, from my standpoint, just turning to you folks as our legal experts and confirming that you believe we're following proper procedure is all I need right now. I see a thumbs up from Commissioner Treese, Commissioner Rogers, Willie, Scouten. So I think we're assured that you have us doing the proper thing. So no further steps needed at this juncture. So those are all the questions that I had. I want to thank you, staff, for following up on this work so that we can proceed with a full, what's the word I'm looking for when the ordinance becomes effective, the full effectiveness of the the ordinance for the significant natural resources and can once again get back to processing development applications. Just to double check, are there any last questions or comments from commissioners on this? None? Okay. Well, thank you very much, team.
Thank you all.
Appreciate the
Thank
good
you.
work.
Thanks.
Thanks for staying healthy. See you next week. Okay, so next we move on to Clean Water Services Energy Management Update.
So we have Nate Cullen, who's our Managing Director for Water Resources and Recovery Operations Services. They're promoting him and Mark Jockers into our meeting, so they'll be able to do their presentation.
Good afternoon, Chair Harrington and the Board of Commissioners. This is Nate Cullen. I'm here to present an update of the Energy Management Program for CWS, where we've been as a foundation for where we are going. Next slide, please. The mission statement for the program says, to further our commitment to environmental stewardship and to continuously improve our performance and control operating costs, we will improve energy management within our organization. Those are words we live by. Next slide, please. There are three main principal components of how we manage the energy. And the first two are to use less of it in the first place. First, by making capital improvements in technology that is more energy efficient. And second, by implementing changes in how we operate that use less energy. So those are energy efficiency measures. The third component is to generate much of our own energy. Next slide, please. And this pie chart shows why we care. Labor clearly is our largest operating cost. And then chemicals and electricity are close second and third. And this shows electricity is $3 million per year. However, without our energy program, that part of the pie would be $5.4 million per year. So next slide, please. And this next pie chart shows a big part of how we are able to cut the electrical operating budget. And that's through generating our own electricity through our cogeneration program. And that's about $1.4 million of the savings that we make is through offsetting how much power we have to buy from PGE. We also save another $1 million through our energy efficiency over the years. So that's where we get the total combined $2.4 million. And then this next slide, please, really shows the story. Since 2012, you can see the blue lines are how much electricity we buy from PGE, and the green bars are how much energy we produce. And what you see is from 2012 to today, we've had a steady decrease in the amount of electricity we've had to buy from PGE. In total, that's 16% reduction over these years. And at the same time, Washington County population has grown by just about 11%. So even though population's growing, we've added new regulations that require more energy use. At the same time, we've been able to drop very significantly the overall amount of electricity that we actually have to buy from PGE. So a little more detail about how we do that. If we go to the next slide, a little summary of what we have at Rock Creek is our original cogeneration facility for the district. We have two 500 kW engines that operate on digester gas. And I know the whole board's been out and seen our generators, they've seen our digesters. I know you know the story about how it's a renewable energy source that we're able to provide green energy. But these engines went in over 30 years ago at Rock Creek. And these are some of the very first cogen facilities in basically the West Coast. We were really pioneers at the time on cogeneration. And these together provide about a third of the power that we use at Rock Creek. And that's electricity. The other thing that they do is the digesters have to be warm to function properly. They actually are body temperature, 98 degrees. So we have to heat the contents of the digesters. And we do that 100% through waste heat that's generated from the cogen system. We also use the waste heat to heat the struvite recovery facility and the dryer that dries the fertilizer we produce in it. So that's a considerable energy savers. Otherwise, it would be natural gas. And then there's a number of buildings that we also do space heating with the waste heat. So next slide, please. At Durham, we also have cogeneration facility. That one originally went in 1990. 1992, we put in a 500 kW engine. But I know we did have a tour with the board that got to see the two 848 kW big Jenbacher engines. So together, they're about 1.7 megawatts of power. And the significance of that is Durham is about 1/3 smaller than Rock Creek, yet it produces 1.8 or 1.7 megawatts compared to Rock Creek's 1.0 megawatts, and which is about 60% of our energy. But the reason it's able to do that is because we import this waste product, and it is a complete waste product. It's used fats, oils, and greases from food service establishments. We call it fog. And when we've done that, it's actually doubled the amount of energy we can produce at Durham. So it's been a real success story for how we were pioneers in cogeneration. And then we took it to the next level by upsizing the facility and incorporating this renewable food waste into the process. The other feature about this was it's an expensive project. So one of the things we did, we were able to secure over $5 million in incentive funding, partly from the Energy Trust of Oregon and also from the Department of Energy, Oregon Department of Energy. So next slide, please. So in addition to being able to produce the more digester gas, which makes more electricity, the other great story about fog is it's a source of revenue into and of itself. We charge a tipping fee for each gallon of fog that's delivered to Durham, and it varies from 7 to 8 cents a gallon. And we're bringing in about 25,000 gallons per day currently. We started out back in 2015 when we commissioned it. That was the first year we were just starting up. The next year we started to ramp up the fog feed. And each year we've been trying to increase the amount of fog that we feed to the digesters and really pushing the limits of the treatment process technology. That's a process our operators and our process engineers have been really seeing how far they can make these digesters go by adding this waste material. So we get the more gas, but also very significantly, it's a pretty big revenue source for us. That's $650,000 a year in 2020. Next slide, please. We also have invested in solar projects. We, again, were pretty early in the whole movement back in the early 2010s, where there was a movement to do a lot of commercial solar. So we did 3 projects between 2012 and 2013. Rock Creek and the main office have smaller systems, but here at Durham, you can see the picture where there's 2 acres of solar panels that equal 400 kW. These were power purchase agreement project for Solar City. So that was a big push back in that day where there were lots of incentives for the commercial market to do solar projects. So we got in on the ground floor on those. Those disappeared as incentives went away. but we are able, the incentives went away, but they're actually coming back, which is something I'm going to talk about at the very end. So next slide, please. But the other part of the story is not just the production, it's actually using less energy. Because, you know, there's always this saying about the recycle, recycle, reduce, and reuse. So, you know, reducing is a really important aspect of energy management. So we've invested in energy efficiency projects since 2012. We've really been involved in this. And it's part of our culture. I mean, it's really invested in how we do our business. Since 2011, we've had 84 projects that are clearly energy saving projects because they all got grants from the Energy Trust of Oregon, which does an audit. They don't give you the money unless the projects actually really save the energy you say they're going to. So it's an external audit on our success of the program. And in that, it's almost 12 million kilowatt hours a year that we save. And to do that, we got $2.4 million in grants. The average payback of these projects is it's less than 2 years. It's between 1 and 2 years is the average payback for these projects. And it's a great partnership we've been able to develop over the years with the Energy Trust. The other thing we've done is we've been really big participants in the programs to do operational changes. And it's programs that the ETO has really been trying to promote, where instead of trying to do it with technology, you do it by changing how you run the treatment process, reducing the flow rates or turning things off, cycling them on and off, trying to find ways to do it that save energy. And that's something I'm particularly really pleased to see, is that we have 96 of these projects that cost us really just about no money to do. They were pretty much low or no cost initiatives. And the grant funding we received on these wasn't to buy anything. It was to basically pay us some labor to do reprogramming of our controls. And that's basically it, reprogramming of our controls. So in-house labor got offset with some of this grant money. So next slide, please. And this is where these energy efficiency programs got started, was back in 2012. Is something that the Energy Trust was calling their Industrial Energy Improvement Program. We were one of the earlier cohorts with that, where it was industrial cohorts got together to share ideas on how they could save energy. Out of that, we created what we call the Process Innovation and Efficiency Team, the PI team. And a lot of staff, we're getting together on a monthly basis to try to vet ideas to save energy. So we had a team, in-house team formed to do that. A few years later, the Energy Trust came up with a new version of the same program and called it the Strategic Energy Management Program. So after we signed up and did that again, and the part that was really particularly rewarding to me is we expanded the team on that. We included the operators and instrument techs, mechanics, electricians, and we call them the green energy teams. And these guys come up with ideas all the time. And they actually formed a team at Rock Creek. They called themselves the Kilowatts. Now, the Durham guys couldn't be outdone, so they had to call themselves megahertz. So, you know, they not only are they doing good work, they're having some fun with it as well. So next slide, please. And of course, you know, we save the energy, but we really have done a great job in being at the forefront of a lot of innovation in doing it and being very successful at it. So the success has contributed to us getting 2 Utility of the Future awards, one in 2016, one in 2018. We got an Intelligent Water System Award at WEFTEC in 2018 because of an energy efficiency program. And it's also been a factor in getting the Leading Utility of the World Award 2019. So there are some outside accolades because of the work we're doing. Next slide, please. And we plan to keep going strong. You know, we're not resting on our laurels and saying we've done a good job. We want to keep going. So we've identified the energy strategy for the next 5 years, 2020 through 2025. And we're going to keep with our foundation of the energy teams, the green teams, because what that does, it really, besides saving energy, it's a great team building morale factor. Lots of people get gratification to see their ideas come to reality. So it's been really positive for that. We've been, like I say, a great partner with the Energy Trust of Oregon. We got just a wonderful relationship that they know not only do we come up with ideas, we execute. And that's something that so many of the customers that they have aren't able to do. They might come up with ideas, but they haven't been able to have the wherewithal how to actually take the idea and make sure the project gets implemented into action. So that's one of the things that we've been very successful at. We want to continue exploring renewable natural gas, RNG project opportunities. And that's something we've been looking at off and on for the last couple of years and is high on our priorities for the future. Another thing is we're going to conduct a feasibility study of solar project opportunities. This is something new that the Energy Trust is going to fund this feasibility study. They've actually worked with us and said that the price of solar panels have really come down. They're no longer dependent of the incentives that when they went away, they weren't very competitive. So the prices have fallen, and there's a lot of interest in trying to develop more solar energy in Oregon. So we have some candidate projects to do that, and we're going to be able to do the feasibility study at the Energy Trust subsidy. And then the next slide, please. And this is where we're going, and probably the main thing we wanted to be able to give you the background of what we've been doing in the energy program to date, and what is the most exciting part of what we're looking at doing in the future. And it's really looking at this renewable natural gas opportunity. This has been something we've looked at a couple of years because there's been a lot of incentives out there in the marketplace that make RNG 5 to 10 times more valuable than commodity natural gas. With that kind of a premium to be paid for the RNG, it's generated a lot of interest in the marketplace, the private sector marketplace. So in that, it's translated into not just their interest, but doing public-private partnerships where we would be partnering with private entities to finance, design, build, and maybe even operate the facility in exchange for a tipping fee. So to find out the regional interest, we recently issued out what we call a request for information to solicit offerings, not just for RNG, but even a little bit bigger than that. It's to bundle increasing digestive capacity so we can bring in more waste material, potentially food waste, and use that to be able to produce more digester gas, which would help the economies of scale to make producing RNG more economically feasible. So it was something we wanted to see what the marketplace would, how they would respond, and we got enthusiastic response. We got 11 serious proposals. We had it on the street for, I think it was about 6 weeks, and I'm sure we got hundreds of phone calls of interest and asking questions. So that's where we're at right now. We're in the process of evaluating these submittals with the intent that we would come back to the board in February to report on our findings, our results, and to be able to make a report on that and also recommendations for possible path forward. So next slide. And with that, I just want to open up for any questions you may have.
Commissioners, Dick Scouten.
Thank you, Nate. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Nate. It's always great to listen to your presentations and to hear your excitement and the interesting information that you present to us. And you did again. You made a comment towards the end about that renewable natural gas is more valuable than conventional natural gas. How is that so? My first reaction was, aren't these very fungible commodities?
It's a great question, Commissioner Scott. And there was originally a few years ago, there was the price of RNG was really propped up by incentives from the federal government called RIDs, Renewable Identification Numbers. And there's something that the oil industry has to buy to offset the greenhouse gases they produce.
I see.
And it's a program that I believe it's 2025, 2030 that the RINs are into effect for. And the constant speculation, will the federal government keep renewing those RINs or not? So a few years ago, there was some uncertainty in the marketplace whether or not that would happen. That seems to have settled down quite a bit. And there's a lot more very serious interest in big developers getting into this marketplace because of the federal subsidies. And then the other thing that's happened, like here in Oregon, I forget the Senate bill last year that really promotes and encourages renewable natural gas. So there's I forget the number, but there's a Senate bill that did that. So a lot of regional areas are promoting and incentivizing renewable natural gas for greenhouse gas effect on a state level. So the whole marketplace has gotten where even if the RIN program went away, the developers we're talking to think there's enough of the state regional program that will keep the price up for the payback of the projects, which is 5 to 10 years. So it all has to do with incentives to promote a cleaner, greener source of energy. That's where it comes from.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
It's about so many,
Any other commissioner questions? Commissioner Treese?
I have a question, Nate. Thank you very much. It's really it's great to see this presentation, to see kind of the innovation side, but it's also especially meaningful now since we just had our WEF Tech conference out there to see the pictures and relate to that. As far as the fog, is it let's say it's oils and grease? Is it fuels, oils and grease?
Oils and grease.
Fats. Yum. Have you noticed a decrease in that during COVID with what we're experiencing across the board?
We certainly did. When the first lockdown back in March, April, May, we saw I forget, it was about a 20 to 25% reduction. That it was a very noticeable drop. And it was more only, but we were still getting enough to maintain the energy production, the gas production, but we weren't seeing as much as a high of the tipping fees. And then as the reopening occurred, that fog amount has come back up. And we haven't seen a decrease, it's too soon to say if there's going to be a decrease in the last month or two. And that's partly because the fog comes from grease interceptors that get pumped everywhere from every month to every 2 to 3 months. So there's a lag time before we'll see that. But yes, absolutely, we did see that a dip in the amount of fog that was produced.
Yeah, I have a quick question as well. We've been on this path a long time together, and there was some tax incentives at one point, and I thought that we used, and that had we obviously couldn't use them because we're not a taxable entity, but we were able to pass those credits. Is that program gone, or is there any tax credit anymore?
I don't think there's any, Oregon Department of Energy is the one that does the tax credits. And that program did sunset a couple of years ago. So I'm not aware of any that are here today. But the whole idea of being able to do it with a public-private partnership where a public entity who finances it may be able to access different kinds of tax write-offs than just a specific incentive for this green power, but just being able to have other kind of write-offs that would be able to allow them to finance it and promote it better than we could as a public agency.
Yeah, I've just finished my thought, and that is that just future thinking that much as we've seen with the housing industry, as you know, the low-income housing, one of the reasons that's so successful and is able to be done is because of tax credits. I mean, that's exactly how it's being done. I just think that in the future, maybe as we expand green energy, that we can figure out how we can obtain a lot more tax credits, because it's interesting how businesses will move real quickly if they get those credits. So if we could look into that at some point, I mean, it could be their facilities are not generating what they could. You and I both know that, and all it takes is a bit more money and maybe some incentive from those who can get the credits on the equipment, or they can get the credits in some other fashion. So anyway, I'd encourage you to take a look at that.
Definitely will. Thank you.
Chair Harrington and the board, one thing I also wanted to point out is this morning's adoption of our state legislative agenda includes specific activity that we try to do around energy resource recovery and energy, renewable energy production, incentives, conservation programs. That's really where we played a lot in terms of the tax benefits that came through ODO that we would then try to sell to third parties. But that will be something we'll continue to investigate, certainly, Commissioner Rogers.
I also wanted to add that it's really important to acknowledge Nate and his team. They incubated this from the beginning, and it's really successful because of all of the team members are actively engaged and involved. And they were calling it their energy treasure hunts, I think, for a while, and that really started that creativity and innovation on the team. And often utilities struggle to get interest all the way to the line staff. And I think Nate and the team, you've been very successful. It's been part of the Goal Share program. And it's really exciting to see them plan for the future with RNG, because tax incentives and the ability to work with public-private partnerships is where these types of projects can occur. And Roy, you were referring to the business energy tax credits, right? The BETC credits, and that program had framework issues, so it was sunsetted here in Oregon. But I'm really hoping through the RIMS credits and others that we'll be able to, Nate and his team will be able to have some pretty innovative for you. We're trying to deal with even our sludges and how we land apply and et cetera. So they're looking at gas and digester gas and even sludges potentially. So this team is amazing. So Nate, I wanted to be able to say that very publicly for you and to acknowledge your great work in this area.
Well, thank you.
I think going forward, one of the things I think one of the lessons learned from Betsy is that to help protect the honest players out in the world, the honest investors, entities like Clean Water Services and people who are doing this for all the right reasons, are protected from bad apples. And so that we have to also be mindful that there's certain frameworks and guidelines set out so that it's not possible or much more difficult for dishonest people to do dishonest things with respect to the buying and selling of tax credits.
Maybe if WEFTech opens us up again, maybe next October. I think last couple WEFTechs ago, Nate took us all, and I think including Roy, you were on that tour to look at a landfill to look at their gas handling system. But yeah, more work to be done and to introduce the board to the new technology that's available for energy generation. So thank you, Nate. Thank you, board.
Yes, and I want to thank the board too, because a lot of utilities don't have the ability to venture into this territory. it's really exciting stuff, and it really energizes our staff to be able to operate in this arena, because there's really great potential to even do, as you say, Commissioner Rogers, even more in energy production here. But it's got to be creative. It's got to be thinking outside the box and not do the traditional utility kind of mindset. So it's great to have the ability to test out some of these other ideas.
Commissioner Willie, did you have any questions or comments?
No, just a comment. And I do appreciate, Nate, all the work and the enthusiasm, like everybody else has said, on charting new territories on how we can actually benefit from doing something even better. And so I sent Mark and Diane a picture of a facility not too long ago that certainly was probably similar to the 70s and 80s of Unified Sewage Agency here. And it was the reason why I did that is because it was such a stark contrast between that facility and the facility that we get to enjoy here with Clean Water Services. So again, everywhere you go, it's good to be able to say we are industry leaders in a variety of ways. And so I just want to say, just keep up the good work, Nate, and come up with some more clever titles for your teams and keep that competition going. That's how we win. So congratulations on that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hey, Nate,
Yeah,
I think,
would add,
excuse me.
no, go right ahead.
I think megahertz should be spelled MEGAHURTS to go along with the kilowatts.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I would add, Nate, you really have done a great job of engaging the whole team in this endeavor. It's one of the things that makes the workplace of Clean Water Services more interesting and exciting for everyone involved, and all of the ratepayers get the benefit of that. So thank you. On the issuance of the, well, first on RNG gas, I may have heard a comment incorrectly over the course of this past, well, I think maybe it was during our tour or something, but I heard someone express that there was some reticence on the part of the natural gas pipeline here in Oregon for importing or inserting, I don't know quite the right phraseology, our RNG gas into the pipeline, which sort of goes counter to the efforts through the Senate bill to allow that, because previously the Northwest Natural folks were very interested in ensuring they were able to maximize the capacity in their pipeline. And that's one of the things that I'd understood made RNG more attractive to them. So I feel like I have a little whiplash there. So really, what's going on?
I'm not an expert on how Northwest Natural thinks, but we've been talking to them for quite a few years, before the Senate bill and after. And it's interesting, within Northwest Natural, they've got the regulated part of the company and the non-regulated. And the non-regulated is pretty tiny. So those guys had a lot of interest, a lot of enthusiasm, but then they were running into the problems that it wasn't allowed by the PUC. The Senate bill completely changed that. Right. And they have done an about face to be, well, it sounds good. We kind of wish we could do it, but we can't. They are eager, and they're in a lot of the proposals. They are a player to be part of a number of the teams. So it's been a very significant about face in this, because now it's allowed by the PUC for them to do this.
It was part of a learning process.
That's what I thought. So yeah. I don't understand why the statement came up recently, and maybe I just misunderstood the ordering.
Yeah, it's part of the becoming acquainted to the quality of our gas also. So there really is a shift because there was a shift in policy. There's a shift because a shift in understanding of the quality of our gas. So the question is, how much carbon dioxide do you have in it? How much siloxane do you have in it? So they needed to really explore all those questions. They do have experience with landfill gas, so sewage gas was just sort of a new thing. And it's just like when we tried to make a beer out of our treated high purity water, the question to us by some very scientific folks was, is that really water? We're like, yeah, it really is water. So I think
it sounds like it's more the familiarity and being better acquainted with the product and being comfortable with the product.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there is that other aspect, and that, so the management interest in it has completely changed. But what I think what we're talking about is the engineering and the maintenance people's reluctance to accept it the same as their own gas. They want it to be at a higher quality, just like Diane says about the water for the beer. It's that whole idea. If it's not ours, we want it to be better than ours to accept it. Because they're incurring a liability, and it's pipeline corrosion is one of the things they're concerned about. Having oxygen in the gas, which could then promote the corrosion. And there's been a couple of those big, very tragic pipeline failures that have caused the big explosions and fires. So that kind of is where that's coming from the engineers and maintenance people being very cautious on bringing something that they don't control into their pipeline.
Okay, great.
The consequence of that, it just raises the price for it. We have to just put more treatment processes in to do a high level of treatment.
Okay, thank you for helping me understand that. And second to the last point is on the request for interest for the RNG gas opportunity and further expanding capacities and so forth. I don't recall if I mentioned this in a one-on-one with you, Diane, or not, but this feels very familiar to me because while I was a Metro counselor, we similarly did an RFI because of sourcing food waste materials. So I just hope that you've taken advantage of the opportunity to reach out to a sister government and leverage the experience they went through in exploring that. They ultimately paused that project, but I don't know if I had ever mentioned that before. So just wanted to make sure I did that. But yeah, having 11 serious proposals is pretty darn good. Or at least based on my prior experience of just a handful, that's quite a crop. So great. So I would just like to compliment the whole team on your pursuit of energy savings opportunities and energy efficiency through operations, as I mentioned just moments ago, to the benefit of our rate payers, but also to our environment in the larger picture and the longer term. So thank you very much for doing this work and for sharing it with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks for staying healthy, Nate and Mark. Really appreciate it. All righty. Well, then we'll move on from this topic of energy savings and go to our last topic of the day, body-worn cameras, continued presentation and discussion. I believe we have several team members here for us today, so I'll turn it over to Ms. Angie so she can let us know who all is here to help us today.
I'm happy to introduce to Tanya if you'd like. I'm ready.
Well, I couldn't unmute myself fast enough.
I can't see everybody now because of the presentations up. So.
Well, thank you, Erin. I was actually going to hand the conversation over to you in presentation. Erin Calvert is going to help facilitate this conversation because we do have several speakers, and she'll go over the agenda. Erin?
Exactly. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Harrington, Board of Commissioners. As mentioned, I'm Erin Calvert with the County Administrative Office, and I'm joined today by several staff that I'll introduce shortly as we walk through a presentation and discussion on body-worn cameras. And the purpose of this work session is to continue the discussion on body-worn cameras and provide a presentation as a follow-up to the items from prior work sessions in both June and September earlier this year. If at the end of today, the board wishes for us to place this as an action item on December 15th, the December 15th business meeting, then staff are prepared to do that. Next slide, please. To orient you to the presentation, I just wanted to refer to the information in your packet that we've put together to assist in the discussion today. And as you know, as I mentioned, the topic has been before you at work sessions in June and September. So the prior packet content, which is referred to on this slide, is specifically a memo from the sheriff that he wrote to the board, which is dated September 17th, a follow-up memo from the sheriff to the board dated September 24th, the Sheriff's Office body-worn camera policy, and then a document that provides information on the CAHOOTS program. In addition, I've submitted a summary memo that attempts to capture a high-level summary of information, and then, as you know, Clerk Moss submitted separately a packet of constituent letters. Today, we'll walk through a PowerPoint presentation that will start with Sheriff Garrett and his team of subject matter experts. We'll transition to a presentation on behavioral health services by Kristen Burke and her team. And then I'll come back on to discuss the budget details, and we'll have John Steyer from the Sheriff's Office and Jack Liang available to answer any questions as well. We'll wrap up with some questions, though we have embedded question slides in between in the transitions. Next slide, please. So barring any questions, I'm happy to turn it over to Sheriff Garrett.
Sheriff Garrett, can you hear us? You are on mute.
Now, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Erin. Good afternoon, Chair Harrington and Commissioners. Thank you for your continued engagement with our community and our office about the issue of body-worn cameras in our patrol division, totaling just over 200 deputies and corporals. The purpose of my remarks today is to provide you details about what underpin my recommendation to move forward with body camera deployment. Slide, please. In addition to the information on this slide, which is mostly a review for you, I have just a bit more information. Number one, in 2015, the Oregon legislature passed House Bill 2571, which provides standards for the use of body-worn cameras. The bill's requirements include that an agency that equips an officer with a body-worn camera must establish policy and ensure officers follow the rules. That officers activate body cameras as soon as they have probable cause that a violation is being committed. We go a step further and require camera activation during all public demand and self-initiated calls for service that involve contact with community members. The House bill requires officers must inform community members of their conversation that the fact that it's being recorded, which we do as practice in our training and also in policy. And law enforcement agencies must later collect and store recordings for at least 180 days. That is our policy, and must be destroyed after 30 months unless they're part of a criminal case or some other court order requiring that evidence be maintained. If provided publicly, the faces of both the police and community members must be blurred. That's a nod to privacy for our community. Generally, as a general rule of thumb, it takes about 10 minutes of work to blur faces of 1 minute of video. Lastly, the bill was supported by organizations to include the Oregon Association of Chiefs of Police, the Oregon State Sheriff's Association, and the American Civil Liberties Union. On the slide in front of you for 2018, I do want to point out that we've had about a half a dozen deputies who as a result of physical maladies during our pilot. They did express concerns that may be correlated to the body-worn camera transmitter. It's basically a low-grade cell phone. We are working with RISC to identify whether or not there's a correlation. There's just no information that we can find that suggests a correlation. It's been about a year since the last person expressed concern about that. But the pilot has continued for over 2 years. But I did want to raise that as an issue that we're currently addressing with RISC staff at the county. And then lastly, I might advance the slide to the next one. It came up recently, while you review this, it came up recently that we had several cameras for canines. And I just want to be clear about that. In 2013, when the technology was brand new, we acquired 2 cameras, which was funded by a federal grant. And then 2 years later, we acquired 2 more cameras funded by the Sheriff's Office Association. No county funds have been expended to acquire these cameras. They are used to improve safety when searching high-risk areas. For example, our tactical negotiations team, which has a county-wide mission, if they are trying to resolve a situation where we have a barricaded armed individual where it's gone quiet for a long period of time, it is more safe to send a canine in to search an area with a camera than it is to send tear gas inside or a person inside. I was on a call with 12 police 2 years ago, and they requested our canine with a camera to look into an attic area where a domestic violence suspect who was known to be armed was believed to be hiding. The canine was entered into the attic. The suspect was captured on camera, and that knowledge helped officers talk that suspect into complying without crawling up into an attic and using force and injuring either the officer or the community member slash suspect. Slide, please. So my recommendation, as I said, is to approve patrol deployment. We recognize that body-worn cameras are not a panacea. By themselves, this technology doesn't create accountability, transparency, and improve safety, but they're an important part of those elements, and they can play a role in the broader change in policing culture because they capture an accurate depiction of events where the camera is oriented, because the video is available as governed by statute, both publicly and in our justice system, because through agency experience, the knowledge of being video and audio recorded can have a positive influence on behaviors, because the audio and video record can have a significant liability protection for the county, minimize or reduce associated taxpayer costs, because of their training value. They provide an evaluation of interactions of individuals and agency for individual and agency professional development, and because of their enhanced evidence gathering ability in some cases. Slide, please. I also understand that without carefully crafted policies and laws that are followed, there is a risk that technology could not be value added, and it could work against what I've outlined as my recommendation. And I'll be more specific and start with accountability. Our policy requires, and our experience over the 2-year pilot has proved that when deputies do interact with community members, whether it's a public demand call or self-initiative call, they activate their body-worn camera. And at the beginning of an encounter, as soon as is reasonably possible, advise people that they're having contact with, that their encounter is being recorded. The video was automatically encrypted. That's super important. I get the community's concern that it could be manipulated, deleted in some way. That's just not possible with the provider of our body-worn camera video. It's automatically uploaded into a secure cloud server. The only thing a deputy can do is classify the video by type, for example, theft or agency assist or welfare check or burglary, that kind of a classification. we have a policy with ramifications for those who don't follow policy, right? If the camera's not activated when it was supposed to be activated, but more importantly, we have a culture of expectation that when our professionals encounter our community members, they activate the camera. And that's been our experience over the past 2 years. Slide, please. With respect to transparency, our policies are forward-facing as a starting point for transparency. To include our body-worn camera policy, it's both comprehensive and specific. For example, it outlines very clearly the retention requirements for the video. Importantly, the Oregon legislature exempted body-worn camera video from public disclosure unless the public interest requires it. In cases like excessive force cases would certainly require disclosure. In cases where there's an allegation of other serious misconduct or inappropriate physical contact, say by a deputy and a community member, that would require disclosure. And the reality is, in much less serious cases, disclosure happens because it is an accepted practice for our partner agencies and for our own agency during this pilot, that if a complaint, if the interaction is captured on the video, on the body-worn camera video, the supervisor has invited the complainant in to look at the video together to make sure that we have a common understanding about what happened, or at least can make our best effort to have a common understanding and then address what happened together. And I'll pause there just for a moment in case there's questions.
Commissioners, do you have any questions to this point?
Well, I could wait. Yeah, I could wait till the end on this, but I just wanted to go back to where you said it took 10 minutes to blur out the faces of 1 minute of video. I mean, technology is significantly changing, all the time. Is there a possibility that that part of it could be enhanced as well? Because we hear of not only the cost of complying with that, blurring out all the faces, but a variety of other compliance things that's going to go with this, additional costs that our DA is going to incur. So is technology, is this early in the technology stages of things? So we're going to see considerably better enhancements to this, or where are we on all of that?
Our technology experts are advising that will get faster as time goes by, right? That the ability to in an automated way blur faces of video will get faster. But for the past 2 years, that's been about the rate, about 10 minutes to blur faces of 1 minute of video. And that is consistent with our partner agencies who have experience on a wider scale, specifically Beaverton and Hillsborough. It is part of the administrative cost that comes with the system and required by state statute. Thank you for that, Commissioner. I'll continue here with respect to actually, let's see here. Slide, please. Respecting privacy interests is why a policy, to include our policy, and training provides exceptions to activating the video where there's expectations of privacy, like in hospitals and mental health facilities, where someone who has been traumatized and is a victim of a violent assault, that's another appropriate time when that video might be deactivated if that is a request by the victim. And we talked about faces being blurred. I want to bring up, when it comes to privacy and policy, that our most recent meeting with the Sheriff's Office Latino Advisory Commission, they reviewed our policy and they provided some really important input into that policy when it comes to discretion that a deputy has to not turn on the camera, and we are making recommendations to essentially narrow that discretion so it only exists in very clearly spelled out cases like I just discussed. And also, if another agency is investigating a personnel complaint that might be captured on our body-worn camera video, then we would share that with the other agency. And so those are really good points brought up by the Advisory Commission, which we are making adjustments to our policy to reflect and be more community informed about that. Slide, please. With respect to safety, bottom line, I believe the knowledge of being video and audio recorded increases safety. It's anecdotal. The agencies with broad experience in this, that is their consistent experience. Though I recognize that there are studies that have differing conclusions on that. I've reviewed, getting ready for today, a study out of Rialto, California, which strongly suggested they help reduce the total number of use of force incidents and complaints. Other studies say it has no impact, and I get there's competing studies on this issue. But overall, my belief is it can decrease the amount of confrontational situations that we could end up being involved in with community members. Slide, please. From a risk standpoint, both county risk and county council support the likelihood that video and audio recordings of critical events will reduce overall taxpayer costs of defending civil claims. There's additionally positive holistic value that comes from more accurate record of events that improves agency feedback, both professional development on the individual level and on the agency level. And then the third bullet on your slide, look, it's two sides of a coin. If the footage shows that we acted appropriately, that's really, really valuable. If it shows that it's an inadvertent oversight for corrective action, there's value there. And if it's serious misconduct, then there's equal value there. Slide, please. Also, of a recent community discussion that the body-worn camera video does not have an effect on use of force, it's really important that we recognize the factors that most impact use of force. They're really not associated with cameras. Cameras can help mitigate that risk, but what is more important is the recruiting function and getting officers with strong character, values, judgment, decision-making, long-term training. That's what shapes ingrained behaviors around control, using force, de-escalation, gaining time and distance when feasible, communication. That's the most important factors when talking about use of force, and then backed up by scenario-based training in a safe environment so that when deputies find themselves in a similar scenario in the community, they are more prepared to respond and deal in a measured, legal, professional manner. And that's really what our training center is all about. Our Public Safety Training Center opened last year, as you know. We can take body-worn camera video of what have been real events and build more impactful training events, scenario-based training events around those interactions and better learn from them, in my view. Slide, please. From an evidence standpoint, there's clearly improved criminal evidence in some cases, and I'm thinking vehicular assaults where literally the smoke hasn't cleared when we just show up to get a accurate view of what had just taken place. Sexual assaults, it's a very similar manner when a deputy arrives on a domestic violence case and he or she is walking up to the location, and those first screams of a survivor trying to get away from her assailant, which in 99% of the time that's the case. That's really impactful, and it's hard to describe that in a report. It's much more impactful to describe that in a video and audio that goes along with that. And then just I've touched upon this, following up from personnel complaints. I think the evidence there will also improve our ability to do that as well. Slide, please. To wrap up, I recognize this is costly, and this year's cost is already captured in our budget, but there are out-year costs which this decision does impact. This program is supported by our Enhanced Sheriff's Patrol Advisory Committee. Utility, our service provider, is a system that's endorsed by the NAACP. And so that's really my recommendation. I would say the last comment I'll make would be, even if we didn't show up to a single additional behavioral health problem or someone in crisis, I would still recommend a body-worn camera system for our deputies in the current landscape where they are working and their challenging mission, having the community's best interests at heart. We want to make sure that we do the right thing, and having this record of events helps us ensure that we're on the right track. So thanks for hearing me out, and would love to answer questions.
Commissioners, any questions?
I have a question to start with. By the way, beautiful photograph. We hope that's the sunrise and not the sunset, right? On the endorsement by the NAACP, can you tell me a little more about that? Is that something? How is that done? Is there some kind of a policy board or review that makes recommendations and then they're voted on by their membership? Can you tell me a little bit about how that endorsement worked, if you can?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Scouten. I have a letter from their national office that endorses utility as a system provider, and it's an assumption on my part. I think their endorsement has to do with it being the video is automatically uploaded. It doesn't touch hands, go through a local system. It's automatic, so there's no opportunity to alter, delete, interfere with the video. That's my belief. But we have a letter from the national office which endorses utility.
So is this is endorsement very specifically for this vendor, or are they also endorsing the concept of body-worn cameras?
Yes, sir. It's just the vendor.
Okay.
I have a question. Thank you, Chair. I have a question, and thank you, Sheriff, for your presentation. It's always enlightening and interesting. There are a couple questions. You said that the Enhanced Sheriff Patrol Advisory Committee endorsed this. Is that correct? Am I?
That's correct, Commissioner Treese. They took a vote at their most recent meeting, which was November. And it was after hearing a briefing by a Beaverton Police Department captain. They were interested in their experience. There's some Q&A. They know that this decision is coming before your board, and they took a vote to recommend the funding for the system. And okay. Frankly, I just got the letter today.
Thank you. And then a separate question. You mentioned some feedback that you got from the Latinx Advisory Committee as well. And what is their position? And can you repeat what their feedback was for me, please?
Yes. So their specific feedback, thank you for the question, Commissioner. Under the list of exceptions in our policy, page 3, there was an exception that was stated to protect the, when the deputy believes use of the body-worn camera would impede or limit the cooperation of a suspect, victim, or witness during an investigative contact, that the camera might be deactivated. So we were thinking domestic violence victim, right? She doesn't want to be on camera talking about her abuser, or a co-conspirator. But the commission, the advisory commission, was thinking, frankly, of the recent Forest Grove case that has gained notoriety locally. And we totally get that we want to narrow that discretion to instances that are clear, they make sense, and they're community informed. And so after we met as policy and planners and our operations folks after that meeting, and we concluded we don't need that exception. So we are deleting that exception because those specific cases we talked about are already covered under other exceptions. That's just one example where the advisory commission is already making an impact on this program. If it goes forward, they have not taken a position because there's still work to do.
So they haven't taken a position of endorsement. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And are they continue? And where are they in the discussion around that issue?
They are committed to helping us deploy, if this happens, to deploy this in a community-informed manner, and advising and working with us to make sure that we do that in a way that lines up with community expectations, goals, and values. So for it's just too soon for them they concluded to endorse the program. There's just work to do. Some of them want to do it. Others are just wanting to feel it's too soon, but they are committed to doing the work with us, and we're committed to doing the work with them.
And I appreciate that, Sheriff. And for the viewing public that may be watching this discussion, when you say too soon, would you remind all of us when they formed, please?
Oh, thank you. We had our first meeting in early November, and we had our second meeting last week. So this is a brand new partnership that we have with our Latino community members, with really a mission of getting our communities of color, the broad spectrum of communities of color, to the table so that we can be more community informed with respect to policy and practices.
Thank you. I just wanted to get that context in here, that it's a new organization or a new group. So thank you.
Other commissioners, questions of the sheriff? Thank you, Sheriff. Really appreciate your providing us with additional information today. Thank you. And
Thank you, commissioners. I will turn it, I'll turn it over to Kristen Burke for her presentation on the behavioral health services in the county.
Good afternoon, Chair Harrington, commissioners. I wanted to provide an overview of some of our crisis services that we have in place in Washington County, and also talk about a planning process that we're going through to evaluate our current system and really look at some of our gaps. And I think that it's relevant to this discussion because a lot of the response that we do for community members are crisis response for people who are in behavioral health crisis. So just really quickly, a quick overview of the crisis services we currently have in place. We actually have one of the most robust crisis systems for behavioral health response in the state. It's pretty comparable to Multnomah County and Clackamas County, but it's nice and broad. And so we have the luxury of having some services that other parts of the state don't have. I'll start with the crisis line. This is available 24/7. It's a dedicated line for Washington County residents. They have clinicians that can provide crisis intervention, safety planning, and referral to the rest of our crisis services. It's, like I said, available 24/7. It was through a contract that we have with Multnomah County. They operate their own crisis center, and we contracted with them out of efficiency to have them answer the line for us. Recently, back in May of 2017, we opened our Hawthorne Walk-in Center. This is essentially an urgent care for behavioral health. So if you have a community member who is needing rapid behavioral health services, crisis intervention, access into the system of care, the Hawthorne Walk-in Center is a place they can go. It's been a successful program since the day it opened. It's open 7 days a week. Pre-COVID, it was open extended hours from about 9 in the morning until 8:30 in the evening. Currently, it's got reduced hours. We're struggling a little bit with staffing. It's taking more staff to operate in the COVID environment than it did previously. But it is still open and still serving the public at this point. Our behavioral health mobile crisis team is a team that we've actually had for over 15 years. It's a team of clinicians, master's level clinicians with training in crisis intervention. They're able to go out into the community and provide support to people who aren't able to get to Hawthorne Walk-In Center or get to other resources. They're often deployed by the crisis line. So somebody may call the crisis line and say, I need to talk to somebody. And it's pretty clear that they need somebody face to face. So our mobile crisis team can go out any day, any time of the day, and really meet with the person in person at their home, in a community center, wherever they may present. Our mental health response team is it's a wonderful program that we started about 10 years ago where we pair a mental health clinician with a sheriff's deputy. This is a really effective program where we're using the cross-discipline of a mental health clinician, a master's level clinician, with a deputy that can really help de-escalate situations, really help identify other things that are going on, provide a safe intervention for our community members. This model has been just a fabulous model since the day it started, and really has brought the Sheriff's Office and the Behavioral Health Program together in partnership in ways that we hadn't been able to do previously. That team is available 7 days a week from roughly 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. We have 2 teams on each day. And then finally, we have a team that we also started around the time we started Hawthorne Walk-In Center, which is a peer crisis support team. So this team is unique in that it is staffed by people with lived experience, people who've been through the crisis system, have their own mental health conditions, and can really connect with people in a way that sometimes clinicians can't. And so they can provide support at the time of a crisis, or they can provide follow-up and help people get connected into care and provide some additional support. This team, we really credit with a reduction in mental health holds in our community. Shortly after they started, we noticed that our number of holds that were occurring started dropping. And in talking with the supervisor of the team, it was really noted that they, again, can really support people in ways that professionals sometimes can't, and can really help with safety planning and connecting with people in ways that professionals sometimes can't. Next slide, please. So part of what we do with the crisis system is a gaps analysis to make sure that we're really meeting the needs of the community. The last time we did one was in 2015, so we're implementing a new one currently. We use the sequential intercept mapping process. This is a nationally recognized best practice approach to looking at your crisis system of care. What you're doing is you're really looking at the points at which people with behavioral health conditions are coming into contact with the law enforcement agencies and criminal justice system. And of course, the goal is first to prevent that contact from occurring in the first place. But if that contact does occur, the goal of the sequential intercept mapping process is to prevent people from going deeper into the criminal justice system. So you're looking at ways of diverting people out of the system as much as possible. When we did this in 2015, the analysis had several recommendations, including housing, which I'm sure is no surprise, but also looking at expanding our stabilization programs that were available to respond to the community, and also creation of a jail diversion coordinator position. So we did expand our programs by adding the Hawthorne Walk-In Center and the Peer Crisis Support Program. And then we did also add a jail diversion coordinator position that works very closely with the Sheriff's Office. That position also helps with some of the crisis intervention training, CIT training that our law enforcement officers across the county receive. Next slide, please. So we are launching another evaluation of our system. We've had a lot of changes over the last few years and felt it was time to relook at our system of care and update the map. So our jail diversion coordinator, his name is Jay Oslander. He is leading the process, and he's doing it in partnership with the Oregon Center on Behavioral Health and Justice Integration. This is a center that is contracted by the Oregon Health Authority to help counties do this sort of system mapping work and looking at the criminal justice system and where we can try to, have our folks with behavioral health conditions not go into the criminal justice system. So they have already set up a mapping process and have gotten it underway. We're putting together a multidisciplinary group that includes emergency medical services, hospitals, law enforcement agencies, the jail. It's really a multidisciplinary group that is coming together to participate in this process. And again, the goal of it is really to look at where do we have gaps in our response. We have a pretty robust system, but we always want to look and see, is there more that we can do? Are there places where we're not connecting with people? And so what will come out of that is a recommendation for service expansion or new service development. So we'll see how that comes out. Next slide, please. We expect that some of the recommendations could include some sort of partnership with EMS to look at elements of the CAHOOTS model. I will say that our mental health response team, our pairing with the sheriff's office, actually already has a lot of the elements of the CAHOOTS model in terms of the intervention. But there may be more that's recommended, and especially when you look at potentially partnering with EMS. The mental health response team has been a wildly successful program. There may be some more recommendations around that program. And then it's always possible that they could suggest areas where additional care coordination could help really connect people into the system of care wherever possible. Next slide, please. So the planning group for this process has already met twice, and they have put together a large-scale mapping process for December 17th. It's a half-day event with lots of different community members being engaged in that. What we wrestled with was how do we engage the community in this conversation? The mapping process really requires a lot of the subject matter experts. And so we met with the community engagement program to talk with them about what are our options to really make sure that we're hearing from the community and hearing recommendations from the community members to bring back. So what we've decided we're going to do is get an initial draft version of the report from the Center of Excellence that's going to be putting that together on our behalf, and then do some community engagement sessions to really try and get feedback before the report is finalized, and really hear from them what they would prioritize in terms of the recommendations and opportunities for us to support our community members. Next slide, please. Yeah, I think that's about it. Any questions?
Well, I guess it's early yet, but any feel for what these new recommendations could possibly cost, and what would 250 to 300,000 a year get you?
Well, I can tell you that a crisis clinician, a master's level crisis clinician, typically costs in the neighborhood of $120,000 per FTE. So, that's one area you could look. I think that there may be some recommendations around partnering with other organizations that may not cost as much if we're able to partner, say, with EMS. But I don't honestly have an idea at this point about how much it would cost. To add another MHRT team, another one of our mental health response teams, we have 2 currently, and to add a 3rd team each day would require the cost of 2 full-time clinicians as well as potentially 2 full-time deputies.
So we could easily burn through another 250, 300,000 a year fairly easily.
Yeah. For context, our current crisis system for Hawthorne, for the mobile crisis team, for the clinician side of the MHRT program, the peers, that total cost is right around $6 million per year.
Commissioner Willie?
Yeah, I guess we've had conversations maybe a year ago that how we could expand some of our Hawthorne services to South County, how we could replicate that. Would that be a part of this study as to how to better serve South County in this area?
You know, that is a really good question. And I think that it's well known that we are, a lot of our services are on the north side of the county. We'll see, I can certainly bring that feedback back to our jail diversion coordinator, make sure that that is specifically raised as an issue to see what people's responses are to that and make sure that that is included in the mapping process. So I'd be happy to do that.
Okay. Well, and the other thing is this supportive housing services that we're starting to create, you know, the documents and the kind of the roadmap with Metro on this would seem to be a great source of additional revenues that would help us enhance our mental health services, which I thought was one of the main strengths of passing this initiative in the first place. So I'm hopeful that we would be able to utilize some of this money and do exactly that, enhance our behavioral health services, and certainly, I guess, a variety of other services that are connected with that. So I don't know. I haven't been told no, but I haven't been told yes either. So we must be continuing to research that, and maybe those rules haven't been established yet, but that's what I'm hopeful, that we're able to use some of that money to enhance our behavioral health services.
Yeah, what I can say to that is that, you know, as we're doing this work, we're really looking at how can we provide, you know, supportive housing services, and a lot of supportive housing services are behavioral health services because the people we'll be serving have behavioral health needs. And so if we can get in front of their behavioral health needs so that it doesn't escalate into a crisis, that's always the ideal approach.
Commissioner Willie, if I can add, Kristen is a key member of our Strategic Housing Services Planning Group, and I think that illustrates how centered behavioral health is in the SHS program. So more to come on that as we continue to develop the LIP and IGA, but I do want to just point out that Kristen is involved in that process.
Commissioner Treese, did you have a question? No? Okay. Commissioner Rogers, do you have anything at this point? Okay. I have a question for you or an item for you to touch on for me. And that is, you had come to us prior to COVID asking for support to move forward with an exploration for a treatment and triage center. And I know COVID has really displaced a lot of our hopeful work. I'm wondering, where might we be on that horizon? Is it something that's just been on a total pause and you'll pick back up maybe sometime in 2021, but it'll take us through 2022? Or what might be the situation there?
Well, I am very excited that you asked. So I'm actually coming probably one of the first board meeting or work sessions in February to do a presentation on that. So it's actually up on my monitor right now because I was working on it before this meeting. So that work is actually progressing really well. And we hope to have a feasibility analysis completed by April. And certainly one of the things that we're considering is that addictions don't often happen in isolation. There's housing considerations, there are behavioral health, mental health considerations. And so we are looking at how do these all fit together so that it's not just looking at building an addictions treatment and triage center, but also considering how does that fold into the Metro Bond, how does that fold into the Hawthorne Walk-in Center and all of our crisis services. And so I was going to do an update on the process in February and then bring the feasibility assessment back probably in April. That's our goal.
Commissioners, any further questions for Kristen at this point? I really appreciate, by the way, this presentation. We heard a lot during the, in our budget listening tour, listening sessions in November of 2019. We heard interest about from the community about increasing our mental health services. We heard about it additionally through the listening sessions in August related to our desire for further community input on this body-worn camera proposal. We also heard interest for behavioral health, mental health services, along with other health and human services activities or services, I should say, through the community investment conversation. So I know that there are some feedback points that may be helpful for the behavioral health assessment program and community input you were just looking for. Commissioner Treese, you have something now?
I'm sorry. Yes, I do.
It's okay. That's what we're here for.
You know, Kristen, you guys do such a great job, and it's, you did a great job in explaining all of this. And I'm thinking, as the chair was just talking about the history that we've had with input on this issue, I'm struck by the fact that it almost feels like it's a zero-sum game. Either you support behavioral health or you support the sheriff's office, and it doesn't. And what I'm aware of, and I know, and I've known for quite a while, is how well our two departments work together, and what you do together, whether it's the response team, whether it's the planning, whatever it might be. And the question I have, not just to you, but to all of us, is how can we better demonstrate the work that goes on and the relationship, which is the most important part to me, between and the recognition of the need in our community and the relationship between the two departments. Do you have thoughts there that you might be able to share with us, or any other commissioners have thoughts, or staff?
How to demonstrate it, I'm not sure. That's not my strong suit. But what I will say is that we've really enjoyed the partnership, and when I look at the addictions treatment center that we're talking about, the sheriff's office is at the table, and we're really developing it in partnership together. And so we're so much stronger working together. And so, so I would love to hear ideas about how to make sure that the community knows how well we work together.
And before, I think Tanya may want to jump in here too, but before she does, I want to say, well, first of all, I'm glad that you are doing your end of the job. That's what's important. And I think it's up to others to think about how we communicate that. But just having you here today and talking about how frequently the two departments work together, I think is something that we need to be communicating with our public. Tanya?
So from a staff presentation and presenting information moving forward, I am working with the deputies, the county administrators. When we do present information, presenting it from systems of service, just as we've heard the interrelationship between the sheriff's office and Kristen's group. And so really thinking about that differently from systems of service versus just presenting information from a department basis or how we do the work. So that's something that you have as a commitment from me moving forward to help present things in a different way.
Thank you.
Well, and I would just add from my own standpoint in response to your question, Commissioner Treese, this board has talked about how over the years the county has been very lean in staffing itself for the work. We've learned over, or at least I've learned in my just over 1 decade experience as an elected official, almost 15 years now, that it is incumbent upon us to be our best promoters, to be letting our community know what the services are that we provide. And perhaps we've been too lean about that. So that's something that we'll have to ponder moving forward. It's not enough that we offer services if our community doesn't know what the value of those services are. So thank you for bringing that forward. Commissioner Scouten, you had something more?
Yeah, I guess what I'm struggling with is not so much that it's either or that there's a policy conflict between the two of them. It's more about what about the funding resources we have? Can we do what's right for what may be additional services and gaps that we have on the mental health side of things, as well as money for community outreach or PR, whatever you want to call that, you just mentioned, and then the funding needed to pay for the body cameras and the associated expenses with respect to uniforms, cars, etc.
So Aaron, I have a question at this point. Is there any further information?
There was a couple more slides on budget,
Okay.
so it was a perfect segue, Commissioner Scouten, to get us into kind of the budget slides and then allow for discussion if that timing is okay. Go ahead. Thank you. Okay, so the goal of the next 2 slides is to talk to you about deployment as well as budget options to consider. And I want to acknowledge 2 things. 1, this is a really busy slide, so I will walk you through it. And 2, I want to thank the Sheriff's Office budget team and the support service finance staff for crunching some numbers to determine what might be possible in presenting scenarios to all of you. So some of the costing you'll notice up here on the top part of this full deployment, which talks about what we mentioned to the board in June was the cost of $275,000 per year for 5 years. You'll see this number has gone up just a little bit, and I just want to tell you why. That's has to do with the utility company's quote, and just over time, some of the discounts are lost if you don't take advantage of the order and that kind of thing. So we can go into more detail, but it's just a little bump in that cost. One other detail to note is that Miss Angie had asked the Sheriff's Office a couple of months ago when we were talking about this in a little more detail, to maybe think about a couple of different deployment options and strategies for the body-worn program, just to see if there was any major implications in terms of budget and timeline that we could present to all of you. And so that's what this chart will go over. So on option 1, as I just said, you can see the cost. That's just the basic 5-year plan. This means in year 1, all 210 deputies or corporals, all staff, and the 129 patrol cars that are necessary for upfitting would happen in the first year, or as equipment is available, and then the cost would be spread out over 5 years. Moving to the lower section on the option 2 is the deployment of a slower deployment that would spread costs over the 6 years instead of the 5. So it was a little difficult to break this down just simply because the outfitting the cars, the vehicles, not every deputy or patrol staff has their own vehicle, they're shared cars. And so it was kind of hard to break down the number, but the best that we could present would be the first year would deploy cameras to a little bit more than half of the staff, and it would include all 129 vehicles. So what that means is that 81 deputies would not have a body-worn camera until year 2. And then you can see that the total cost reflects a little bit of an increase because there's less discount given by the vendor, and it assumes a cost increase in year 2. So again, this would sort of be a 2-year deployment plan spread out over a 6-year payment schedule, with the total expenditure being a little bit more than $100,000 more than what we had previously told you. Next slide. So this slide, again, really busy, but I'm going to walk you through it. This slide moves us from the equipment deployment topic to the detailed funding options. And the 3 options we've outlined pertain to option 1 of the other slide. And we just simply did that because it was a little bit more cost effective. But if you, the board, are interested in us doing the same breakdown for that option, we're happy to do that. The first chart up at the top indicates the cost that we gave you in June. Again, you can see a little bit of a discrepancy between the $275,000 and the $279,000 cost per year. That difference is made up and separated out of funds from the local option levy and the district patrol or enhanced sheriff patrol district ESPD. And so you can see if the board were to choose this option, we would spend $275,000 from the general fund contingency, and that would all be used as payment in year 1. Then the additional costs mentioned would be broken out by the FTE split across the funds, and you can see that carry through year 2 through 5. And so if you follow that all the way through, what you'll notice is a decrease in the total use of general fund contingency costs, because we're going to find a way to supplement through the local option levy and the ESPD. As we generally do when we're costing out equipment that belongs to deputies, we try to cost that out in the fund that they're funded out of. So this would follow that track.
Erin, could I ask you a quick question here?
Yeah.
Are we being charged interest over the course of the 5 years? For the,
and
what is the interest rate?
I may need to call on John Steyer for the exact interest on that. I know he's on the call.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. So they offer some discounts based on the quote we have, but I think it's about 10% on money that we push to the following years.
Okay. So an option that isn't here is if it were paid for earlier, and what that would be.
Yeah, I'll walk you through that. That's kind of down toward the bottom of the graph there. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. The one caveat I just want to make sure I'm saying really clearly, because this is assuming, we did some number crunching. We looked at the fund balances of both the levies, but I want to be really clear and transparent that the District Patrol ESPD levy does expire in June of 2023. So this is assuming, 1, that the levy renewal or replacement would pass, and that 2, we would build that cost in as part of it. And that's how we know we could afford it. The second chart or option, which I'm noting now didn't get labeled, but basically the graph in the middle of the page is another way to look at the cost. So if this is the direction the board wanted to go, essentially this option again includes the $275,000 from the general fund contingency in year 1. And then you can see that we would apply $120,000 from the local option levy, $130,000 from district patrol, which was some leftover monies not spent by the sheriff's office. This would essentially front load the first year payment to be $525,000, which would then lower the cost between years 2 and 5, and would take even a little bit less out of the general fund contingency, being nearly $60,000 each year for the following years. And you can see that reduces the total cost by just a little bit, but it still reduces it. And then the third chart down below, we thought about whether to show this one, but we really just wanted to say it's not particularly feasible, but it does show, Commissioner Treese, what you were sort of getting at. What happens if we tried to find some money and just pay this whole thing the first year? We looked closer at our funds, particularly District Patrol. I don't think it can be done. It does reduce the total amount of general fund, but again, just wanted to show you it would cost about 1.27 million in that scenario. The Sheriff's Office is recommending option 2. But I guess, yeah, I can take questions now. That was kind of a fast through the slides, and I'm sure there's some questions.
I just wanted to clarify or ask for clarification. When we were looking at this back in June, I thought we then had an offer of finance over 5 years at 0% interest. So what I didn't realize then that I do now is that there was a time frame for responding to that opportunity.
That's correct. And I may need John again to correct that. I'm not sure if it was a no interest or if they had just broken out the payments inclusive of a smaller interest rate.
All right, if I might just chime in, Chair Harrington. So the quote we had in June incorporated those discounts. And as we got to doing the latest quotes, it came clear to me, talking with the vendor, that it sounds like those discounts reflect their ability to have an interest rate in there. So the current quotes that we have, I believe, is about a 10% if you factor it across.
It may be worth noting, John can confirm this again, that I believe the quote we currently have is good until the end of this calendar year as well.
Okay. I do have some other questions, but I'll hold my questions and have other commissioners go first. Commissioner Willie?
Yeah, realizing that full deployment, 210 deputies, 129 patrol vehicles, I don't know how many that we have currently with body-worn cameras and vehicles that are already set up for this, but it would seem to me that taking this all on in 1 year might be a little bit overwhelming. Is there consideration that we actually need to spread this over 2 years, and that would that help the funding, or I guess make whichever finance program we choose more feasible or more clear for us to take that one? So,
Commissioner Willie, I think the question comes down to, it ends up costing a little bit more in that scenario. We can go back one slide and show that. And then I think the concern from the Sheriff's Office perspective is that 81 deputies would not have body-worn cameras. And so I think that is why they're recommending the full deployment, so that they can upfit and outfit deputies all at once, or notably as the equipment is available.
yeah, I get that, and I certainly I understand that. At the same time, there's going to be pretty significant training that's going to be involved in this, especially for adherence to policies of when to turn it on and when they can't turn it on, and those kinds of things. So I'm not advocating that we do spread this over 2 years, but at the same time, I probably have some concerns about the fact that that the training side of things and making sure everybody's in compliance and understands what's going on could be a pretty strong uphill climb for the first year or so. And I just don't want us to, I guess, hit any tripwires in there, because we are pretty strongly scrutinized for this decision.
Yes, true. And I didn't know if Sheriff Garrett wanted to talk about that or answer that question maybe.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Commissioner Willie. I think we can accomplish the training in a year's time and be confident that we'll do that in a thoughtful, thorough manner. I do think it's going to take about a year, though, to get that done. I think the bigger constraint's going to be, the uniform alterations, not from a cost perspective, but just from a logistics perspective. But I think we can get that done in a year. It might spill over into year two to do it in a thoughtful, thorough manner, but not much more than a year.
Okay. All right. Well, I certainly will trust your judgment on that. And you're in the trenches and I am not in that. And so I want to support you in whatever fashion you think is best. So I guess that's my conclusion.
Other commissioner questions?
Yeah,
Commissioner
thank you. The question I have is, these costs, are we confident that that includes all of the capital and operating costs, that there aren't additional operating costs that aren't included in any of these spreadsheets?
My understanding is it's the full 5-year cost, but I would ask John Steyer to confirm that.
Right, that's correct. The full cost to operate the camera is correct.
Okay.
Any other commissioner questions or comments at this time? Okay, seeing none, I'll start with a question. What we have talked about here is 210 officers, both corporals and deputies, and 129 vehicles. I can't recall the prior equipment that you had. Was it the same firm from utility and the same sort of equipment? Does that equipment stay, or do you need to replace and get the latest so you've got everything in sequence?
Right, Chair, that's a great question. So the 30 that we do have, we've had for 2 years. And so this will refresh those, so they'll all be on the same cycle with all the same equipment.
Okay, cool. And your the documentation that you all have provided us previously, the various memos do talk about the equipment by lease and whatnot. And all that information has been very helpful. So thank you for providing that. Of those 210 officers in total, how many, your slide that talked about utilizing the public safety local option levy and then the ESPD district patrol levy, I was wondering, what is the percentage of deputies that work ESPD shifts versus the rural county or county-wide non-ESPD shifts? What's that ratio? And if you don't know the answer right now, that's okay, but I would like the answer before next Tuesday's meeting.
Yeah, Chair Harrington, Sheriff Garrett here. I should have that off the top of my head, but I don't.
Don't worry.
And that's super,
okay.
Super easy to get. We'll get it to you. Thank you for the good question.
Okay, that would be good to know. Thank you. So I'll just make some closing comments. I have all the information that has been provided by the different departments to help me understand the opportunity and the challenges. But I really want to acknowledge the input that we've gotten from our community members. And I'll speak more about this with our decision and action next Tuesday. But the staff in our organization really stepped up to the plate and helped us put together the August listening session and the November community investment conversations in response to this proposal. And I could not be more comfortable at this point with the variety of input that we've gotten because of that great staff support. It has helped me in my learning and opportunity. For everyone who had the chance to hear my end of year message, you know that I learned a big lesson this year, particularly through this body worn camera proposal to do a much better job of centering the community and making sure that I had done my part to ensure that we had a good spectrum of voices that we were hearing from and listening to. I'll have to say that, you know, from the incident of where George Floyd was unfortunately killed to now, another case has really impressed upon me how useful having body-worn cameras as a tool in the toolbox is really helpful. And that is the unfortunate death of Daniel Prude in Rochester, New York. And that was a case, but for body-worn camera footage, we would not have known about what happened there. That example also shows that there are tragic events, learning opportunities. So how do we ensure that the practices that we have in place on the ground in the community lead to community success? There were just mistakes made from the looks of it, from my viewpoint. So as acknowledged earlier in the presentation today by the sheriff, body-worn cameras are not the solution. We have to have the policies in place. We have to have the practices in place, the accountability. We need the oversight. And part of what he has proposed to us is a system by which not only is this video captured and stored safely, but he has the processes in place through his organization to review this footage and look at those learning opportunities for our personnel. We ask them to do a big job. Let's help ensure that they have the opportunity to learn more and practice continuous improvement as they do that very difficult and dangerous work. We also need our humanity. You know, we can't allow our public safety officials to implement policy without an eye of what any reasonable person could or should do. So these are really important factors that I know we've all been wrestling with. You know, coming to closure on this body-worn camera decision it's not a decision that I've taken lightly. I've invested a lot of time and energy into this and learning more. And I really appreciate the information that the sheriff, that Kristen Burke, that Aaron Calvert and Jack Leong have brought here today so that I am better informed. So I know that our conversation today is not done. We have an action for next week, but even after that, any action, whether it's up or down, will not be the end of the conversation about what we need to and can do moving forward to center community need in our public safety conversations, as well as all of our county-wide investments. And I also want to give a shout out to our new Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer, as well as to her team with community engagement to help us tackle these really hard questions. You know, I've had the benefit of further insight since we started down this path with the sheriff's presentation in May, my review of the proposed budget, and I look forward to continuing to learn more. So before we move on, are there any other additional commissioner questions or comments?
Yeah, in terms of the budget piece, this is Commissioner Scouten. In terms of the budget piece, I know that for the approximately 275,005 equal annual payments to pay for the body cameras. We have that money earmarked, or at least for the 2021 budget, and then in general fund contingency, and then kind of have those earmarked 4 years out. Do we have anything like that for what we might foresee as additional costs that might come out of this study that's being conducted, as was discussed by Ms. Burke? I mean, for example, additional team, or any of the kind of things that were discussed. You know, and where would that money be found? It would have to be. It's not there, I suppose, or is it? I don't know. That's my question.
Commissioner Scouten, I believe it's too early in the process right now to determine what that could be. I know the team is actively looking at other sources of funding, but we really need to go through that mapping exercise and the engagement before we get to the solutions.
I thought that would be your answer, but I thought I needed to ask anyway. Yeah. Okay.
I think this is also where Commissioner Scouten, we look at this as a system again, and as how our investments work toward the end goal of a safer community and a more appropriate approach to community safety.
So commissioners, is there any further information you need before we have this item before us next Tuesday for action? And do you have any preference as to if you want this to be on an action item or on a consent agenda? I would recommend an action item because we've been very transparent about our going through this work. But I want to checkpoint that with you.
I'd be uncomfortable if it, yes, and I'd be uncomfortable if it was anything other than an action item.
I agree.
Okay.
And I agree.
Okay. I'm not seeing anyone weigh in on it, needing any other information, and I only have that one relatively easy question. So if you could just send that by email to all of us, that'll be great. Okay. Well, I want to say thank you, Ms. Angie, for pulling together Aaron Calvert, Kristen, John Steyer, Sheriff Garrett, Jack Leong, all members of the team who helped bring this information forward to us today. And so commissioners, looks like here we are at 3:42, and we've taken care of all the agenda items on our agenda today. Are there any things that have come up since we started our work session this morning that we need to touch on? No? Okay. Well then, we'll adjourn today's work session, and we'll be together next for our pair of meetings on December 15th. That will be our last work session of the year and a very full business meeting agenda. The work session will start at 1 o'clock, full agenda, then the last full normal business meeting for Commissioner Scouten. We will have a special meeting to close on a couple of items the following Tuesday, December 22nd. Any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, the work session of Tuesday, December 8th, 2020 is hereby adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Stay healthy.